Passing, An Insight on the Harlem Renaissance by Victoria Sakarczyk. An Insight on the Harlem Renaissance is a look into African American culture and the pride they put into their music and talent they put into their art, and even literature through poem and works of writing. The Renaissance also allowed for women to rebel against what was previously expected of them when they began to push back against social norms of the time. The Harlem Renaissance allowed for Black people to be able to express themselves through music, art, theater, and literature, and created a great beginning and push towards the civil rights movement and what would occur later on in history, but allowed for a start to the things that would later on be brought back up. Passing was published in 1929 and was placed in New York City within a Harlem town where two friends had reconnected after moving on with their lives. They navigate through re-emerging into one another's lives again with their current struggles, especially with race. Claire struggles the most with her identity due to the fact that she is hiding her race from her own husband. Irene and Claire are both African-American, light-skinned women. Claire can pass as white and does, whereas Irene chooses not to do so. Claire's husband has no idea that Claire is in fact an African-American, while he makes racist jokes in front of Claire and Irene. Claire is able to live a life where she is able to go out in public and passes in places that people aren't normally allowed or socially accepted at if they are Black. The Passing movie. This movie is being directed by Rebecca Hall and will be released in 2021. Tessa Thompson is playing as Irene and Ruth Nedja is playing as Claire. This movie has been on its way for a while, and I think it will be a great movie to show the struggles and lifestyle of how an African-American woman struggles with her identity due to her being able to pass as both a white and Black woman during the Harlem Renaissance. Nella Larson, the author of Passing, was born in 1891 and died in 1964. Nella Larson is an African-American woman who was born in Chicago, and she wrote two novels, one being Passing and the other being Quicksand. She wrote other smaller works of literature as well, but is not as well known for those. The Harlem Renaissance occurred from around 1910 and lasted throughout part of the 1930s in Harlem, New York City. It was when African Americans came forward to appreciate their own heritage through music, dance, fashion, art, theater, and literature. People would perform in many different ways in order to show pride and love they had for themselves, their ancestors, and each other. Louis Armstrong performed during the Harlem Renaissance with one of his most well-known songs being Running Bear. Fats Weller performed Ain't Misbehavin', and Langston Hughes performed I Have Known Rivers. These musicians are only a few of the many great artists that performed during the Harlem Renaissance to express their heritage and love for music. Many showed their love for their heritage and ancestors through jazz music, and others found many other great musical ways to do the exact same thing. Louis Armstrong was a very influential African-American performer during the Harlem Renaissance and was one of the most remembered. He was a jazz musician who allowed people to appreciate and understand the African-American community through the use of his music. He started with very little and was able to make a name for himself by doing what he loved and by teaching people about African-American music. A popular song at the time for him was Jack the Bear. Running Bear by Louis Armstrong. This is a line from the song. On the banks of the river stood Running Bear young, Indian brave. On the other side of the river stood his lovely Indian maid. Little White Dove was her surname. Such a lovely sight to see, but their tribes fought with each other, so their love could never be. Langston Hughes wrote many poems during the Harlem Renaissance about what was going on and relating back to it throughout his jazz poetry. He used poetry to explain life and hardships while also showing love in the faith that he had, and many who also struggled and loved the same way he had. Aaron Douglas was an African-American artist who worked mostly on murals and other paintings. However, he also did some illustrations for books. He was very influential during the Harlem Renaissance because of the fact that at the time it was hard for African-American painters to get noticed because of the fact that art galleries, schools, and even some museums would not teach or show their work in their facilities. Fashion during the Harlem Renaissance, where women who were considered flappers would wear dresses that were shorter than what society was used to them wearing. More than often, flapper dresses were worn by dancers because it allowed them to move more freer to the music because they were so short. Masculinity of women's wardrobe consisted of women starting to rebel against what was expected of them in the physical appearance sense. Women started to wear what would be called men's clothing, like pants. Women were able to push back and be able to make a new name and platform to stand on, becoming more independent due to the new changes during the Harlem Renaissance. From their change in clothes, from being more provocative than before, to taking a stand by wearing more clothes, such as pants, which were formerly only worn by men at the time. The Harlem Renaissance race riot occurred when people began to riot when a shoplifter was arrested, causing many injuries to occur due to it. This riot caused many buildings and people's property to be ruined and defaced, causing people to lose immense amount of money at the time. As the Harlem Renaissance was ending, the stock market of 1929 crashed along with the beginning of the Great Depression. A quote from Passing is absurd, impossible. White people were so stupid about such things for all that means. Fingernails, palms of hands, shapes of ears, teeth, and other equally silly rot. They always took her for an Italian, a Spaniard, a Mexican, or a gypsy. Never when she was alone had they even remotely seemed to suspect that she was a Negro. No, the women sitting there staring at her could not possibly know. This quote shows that the speaker believes that white people to be materialistic in how they look. From their fingernails to their teeth, she explains that white people always mistake light skins for people of other nationalities than the one that they actually are. You can see that the speaker is getting annoyed due to the fact that she probably goes through this often enough for it to become repetitive. She explains that when she is alone in a crowd of people, she is perceived as white. Not only is she with people of her nationality, is she seen for being African American. Another quote from Passing is, "It evidently doesn't occur to either you or Gertrude that he might possibly be sincere in changing his religion. Surely everyone doesn't do everything for gain." Claire began to talk, steering carefully away from anything that might lead towards race or other thorny objects. This quote's importance is in the quote, Claire is clearly uncomfortable with the things her husband is saying because he is a racist and is not shy about it. He talks poorly of people that he sees as dark, as he calls it, and in this specific quote, an African American who wanted to become Jewish. It makes Claire uneasy that her husband speaks this way about her own ethnicity, not being that it bothers her so much, but more of how it'll make Irene feel. Claire is trying to deter her husband from making any more racist comments by changing the subject due to the fact that Irene and herself are in fact still African American women, regardless of him knowing or not. Passing's underlying meaning is that the novel is called Passing because Irene and Claire can both pass as white women in society. However, one chooses to do so and the other does not. Claire marries a white racist who thinks she is white, while Irene embraces her heritage a little more willingly than Claire does. However, she also passes as white at times, especially around Claire's husband.